But one more special I wanted to just talk about for a few minutes here is the WWE Untold special on the network, on Peacock, on the two dudes with attitudes, Diesel and Shawn Michaels. I have a lot of memories from that new generation era period of 94, 95. 95 was not a great year for WWE. I've talked about that before. But I have a lot of memories of Diesel and Shawn Michaels, once they went babyface. And they walked around like they just owned the fucking place. Because I guess they kind of felt like they did. Based on a lot of the stories that are told from that period. But they just worked together. They clicked. They were cool together. And this special runs just under an hour, a little over 50 minutes. They talked to Kevin Nash. They talked to Shawn Michaels, Bruce Pritchard, and David Shoemaker, who I guess is their resident historian now, is Shoemaker. We had footage, and I'm not going to go through everything here, but they had footage of Nash playing college basketball. He had gotten into a lot of trouble. He ended up in the military and playing military basketball. Blew out his knee the first time. And came back to the States and ended up in Atlanta. And he was introduced to the Cheetah Club. Strip club. And they gave him a job there as the floor manager. And he was saying, anybody who's ever works in the field of adult entertainment, you're never late for work. He says you get some nice scenery there at work. And obviously a lot of wrestlers, especially in Atlanta, they would frequent the Cheetah. And Barry Windham is the one who looked at him and said, hey, you got to get into the wrestling business. You're a big bastard. And that's how he first got his foot in the door in the wrestling business and started training. Now, Shawn Michaels, they talked about him growing up as a wrestling fan. We got some footage of a young Shawn Michaels working before he ends up in WWE as part of the Rockers. And he says, look, even though we never won the tag team titles, we were a very good team. And they showed the barbershop footage of him turning on Jannetty. And Shawn says, even with the heel turn, people in the company were very uncomfortable losing to him because he was a small guy, and he, look, he's never going to be Hogan, never going to be the Warrior. It was still the land of the Giants at the time. So Nash gets offered a contract by WCW. He's part of a team called the Master Blasters. He admits it was a way, basically, to make up for Vince taking the Road Warriors in 1990. They show his debut at the Clash of the Champions, and he starts laughing because his partner misses a headbutt by like 3 feet within the first 3 minutes, and the crowd was just... The crowd saw that, and that was it. They lost him. So at that point, Nash goes, it was at that very moment that I was wondering, I wonder what Candice and Joy are doing on top of those tables back at the Cheetah. From there, he became the almighty powerful Oz, which didn't last long, and then he became Vinny Vegas. And it was as Vinny Vegas that Shawn Michaels noticed him for the first time. He got Shawn's attention. Shawn said that, at the time, Andrew Dice Clay was really hot, and Nash was the wrestling equivalent of, with that gimmick, of Andrew Dice Clay. He made him laugh. And he was the Intercontinental Champion at the time. A lot of his matches were ending on a disqualification or a count out, and he had pitched the idea of a bodyguard helping him cheat to win, because it would get him some real heat. And Vince McMahon said, well, who on the current roster do you have in mind? And Shawn said, well, I really don't see anybody here fitting that role. And he spit out the name Vinny Vegas, and Vince told him they couldn't touch any of the WCW guys who were under contract. So a few months later, he mentioned the idea to Rick Steiner. And Rick Steiner says, oh, I'm friends with that guy. I'm friends with Kevin Nash. I'll get you his number. Before you know it, Nash is going to WCW and telling him, look, things really aren't working out. I think I'm just going to go back to, the club scene and bouncing and that kind of stuff. And they believed him, and they gave him his release. And I think the next day, he was on a flight to go meet Vince McMahon in Connecticut. And so things worked out. They signed a contract, and Vince told Nash, look, I got a limo. It's going to take you to Albany, New York. You're gonna screw over Marty Jannetty at a live event. That was the live event where Shawn won the Intercontinental belt back from Jannetty. Jannetty had a very short run with it. Nash met Shawn for the first time. He couldn't believe how deep his voice was for such a small guy. Shawn warned him. He said, look, I got to tell you, not a lot of people like me right now in this company, and it's probably going to rub off on you by association. And Nash's response to him was, I got your back. And out of that, a beautiful friendship was born. And they covered them winning the tag team titles, and they started getting over as a team, and Vince McMahon told, Michaels, hey, Diesel's doing great. I'm thinking about putting the belt on him. And Shawn's thinking, well, I had a little something to do with this myself. And that leads to Madison Square Garden in November of 94, right after the Survivor Series. Nash beats Bob Backlund for the championship in 8 seconds. And Nash said, look, when I beat Backlund for the belt, I was still green. He had less than 200 matches under his belt in his entire career. And we got footage of Diesel giving a promo in front of the live crowd after winning the belt. This to me was one of the coolest parts of the whole documentary because I hadn't seen this footage before. The cameras follow him to the back at the Garden that night after his win. And he goes into the locker room. And we see King Kong Bundy is sitting down, I guess after his match that night. He gets up. He's the first person to come over and congratulate Diesel and shake his hand. And then Captain Lou Albano comes in and he shakes Diesel's hand. He congratulates him. So this was cool. I love footage like this that we just have never seen before. And it makes you wonder how much more of this type of stuff is in the vault that's just sitting there that, we just never get to see. But he made it a point to mention, Nash says Shawn was lobbying for the belt, and it was Shawn's dream. It was Shawn's dream. Shawn always wanted to be the champion. Nash says, I always wanted to be wealthy. It was not my dream. He wanted to be the champion. I wanted to be wealthy. And that was the big difference between the two of them. They talked about their WrestleMania 11 match. They did not include comments from Nash, as he gave in a shoot interview with Sean Oliver many years ago, where he mentioned that Shawn tried to sabotage him on the finish on that awful-looking jackknife powerbomb, which Nash was convinced Shawn did that on purpose because he said, look, Shawn could take a powerbomb better than anybody. If he wanted to take that move the right way, he could have. But he took it the way that he did because he tried to sabotage me because Shawn was gunning for my spot at that time. And that is something that Nash did talk about. He said, look, Shawn clearly wanted to be in the spot that I was in. And they showed footage from the angle the night after WrestleMania with Sid turning on Shawn Michaels and powerbombing him 3 times. Diesel came in to make the save. And the two dudes with attitudes were formed out of this. And later on, Shawn's got the IC strap. Diesel's got the world title. Shawn realizes, hey, what would be cool? I wonder if any two people ever held all the titles. And they were wondering how much heat they would get from the boys if they held all of the belts. The answer, by the way, is a lot. A lot. And that takes us to the winner-take-all match where they won the tag belts from Yokozuna and the British Bulldog, who was subbing for Owen Hart, who came in right at the very end. And they didn't hold the belts, for very long. And Bruce Pritchard says, looking back, it was a mistake because where do you go from there? I think they just gave the belts up, right? Because it was kind of a controversial finish. It's true. I mean, where do you go from there? There's really nowhere else to go at that point. But as a fan at the time, it was a cool thing. Nash wanted to get paid, which is ultimately what led him leaving for WCW. Well, I mean, that and Bret Hart not agreeing to take his finish in their cage match at the In Your House pay-per-view before WrestleMania 12. As I have documented here on the podcast fairly recently, that whole story, being in the back, it was Nash and Undertaker and Bret just wasn't feeling it. Nash was pitching the finish. Nah, I don't really like that idea. And that's where Undertaker piped up and said, motherfucker, not everything is about you. Which I just can't picture Undertaker saying, but I totally believe it happened. They didn't get into that, but the MSG curtain call, they showed the fan cam footage of that. Pritchard said he was watching from the aisle. He hated it. He felt it was disrespectful. It wasn't the right thing to do. And, Nash says, look, Shawn was pissed. Not about the curtain call, but about the fact that he and Hall were leaving. And Shawn bitched at the both of them because he says, look, I've been putting you guys over for months. And I gave you great matches, which you then turned around and used to get these massive contracts. And now you're leaving. You're turning around and you are leaving me. I am the champion now, and you are leaving me short of two of the best guys for me to work with. And Nash says he was pissed, and Shawn had a right to be. They showed footage of Shawn and Nash kind of hobnobbing backstage at Kevin's Hall of Fame induction. Nash talked about how, look, if Shawn Michaels does not pick me back in '93 to be his bodyguard, I don't get to enjoy all the successes that I've been able to enjoy in my life. And Nash, he had this great line. He goes, I've never met a person in my life that I would rather be other than myself. He says, I have no regrets. And Michaels talked about the issues that he was having in his life in 2001 and 2002. And he called Nash one night. He was, shall we say, in an altered state. And Diesel told him, look, buddy, I love you, but you got to get your shit together. You got a wife and a kid now. And within 48 hours, Michaels said he called Triple H, who he had not spoken with in probably a year. They didn't get into any of this as far as why, but yeah, he and Triple H, I think they didn't speak for almost a year because Shawn had gotten sent home in 2001, and I think he harbored a lot of ill will towards Triple H for either, I don't know if he snitched on him because, that night that Shawn passed out in the back in Vince's office, or he just felt Triple H didn't stand up for him. So they weren't on speaking terms for a good year. But after that conversation with Nash, Shawn picked up the phone and called him, and they patched things up, and he realized it was time to get his act together, and he found God, and he says that he's never looked back, and he's been on the straight and narrow ever since. So it was short, like I said, it was a little over 50 minutes. I really enjoyed this one. I thought it was a nice little trip down memory lane. Nash is great in these things. He really is. His shoot interviews are just some of the best. I could listen to him tell stories for hours.